Joe ran as fast as he could, which wasn't that fast in all honesty, but it felt fast for him. He ran down the long, long drive, dodged past the guards, jumped over the wall. Was that wall to keep people out or keep people in? He'd never thought about it before, but there wasn't time to think about it now. Joe had to run and keep on running. Joe didn't know where he was running to. All he knew was where he was running from. He couldn't live in that stupid house with his stupid dad for one moment longer. Joe ran down the road. All he could hear was his own breath getting faster and faster. There was a faint taste of blood in his mouth. Now he wished he tried harder in the school cross-country run. It was late now, after midnight. The lampposts pointlessly illuminated the empty little town. Reaching the town centre, Joe slowed to a stop. A lone car crouched in the road. Realizing he was alone, Joe suddenly felt a shiver of fear. The reality of his great escape dawned on him. He looked at his reflection in the window of the darkened KFC. A chubby 12-year-old boy with nowhere to go looked back at him. A police car rolled past slowly and silently. Was it looking for him? Joe hid behind the big plastic bin. The smell of fat and ketchup and hot cardboard was so stomach-churning it almost made him choke. Joe covered his mouth to stifle the sound. He didn't want the policeman to discover him. The police car turned a corner and Joe ventured out into the street. Like a hamster that escaped from its cage, he kept close to the edges and corners. Could he go to Bob's? No, thought Joe. In the exhilaration of meeting Lauren, or whatever her stupid name really was, he had badly let down his only friend. Mrs. Trafe had been sympathetic, but it turned out she was after his money all along. How about Raj? And yes, thought Joe, he could go and live with the purple-bottomed newsagent. Joe could set up camp behind the fridge. Hidden safely there, Joe could read Nuts magazines all day and feast on slightly out-of-date confectionery. He couldn't imagine a more charmed life. Joe's mind was racing, and soon his legs were too. He crossed the road and turned left. Raj's shop was only a few streets away now. Somewhere above him in the black air, he heard a distant whir. The whir became louder, more of a buzz, then a drone. It was a helicopter. A searchlight danced across the streets. Mr. Spud's voice came out of a loudspeaker. "Joe Spud, this is your dad speaking. Give yourself up. I repeat, give yourself up." Joe dashed into the entrance of the body shop. The searchlight had just missed him. The smell of pineapple and pomegranate body wash and dragon fruit foot scrub pleasingly tickled its way up his nostrils. Hearing the helicopter passing overhead, Joe dashed to the other side of the street and crept past Pizza Hut and then Pizza Express before seeking sanctuary in the doorway of a Domino's Pizza. Just as he stepped out to make a dash past Bella Pasta, the helicopter whooshed back overhead. Suddenly, Joe Spud was caught in the dead center of a searchlight. "Don't move! I repeat, don't move!" the voice thundered. Joe looked up into the light as his body trembled from the force of the rotor blades. "Shove off!" he shouted. "I repeat, shove off!" "Come home now, Joe!" "No!" "Joe, I said—" "I heard what you said, and I'm not coming home. I'm not ever coming home," shouted Joe. Standing there in the bright light, he felt like he was on stage, in a particularly dramatic school play. The helicopter whirred overhead for a moment as the loudspeaker crackled in silence. Then Joe made a run for it, dashing down an alley behind Argos, through the NCP car park and round the back of Superdrug. Soon the helicopter was nothing more than a distant buzz, no louder than the sleepless birds. Arriving at Raj's, Joe knocked gently on the metal shutters. There was no answer. So he banged this time until the shutters shook with the force of his fists. Still no answer. Joe looked at his watch. It was 2:00 in the morning. No wonder Raj wasn't in his shop. It looked like Joe would have to be the very first billionaire to ever sleep rough. "What are you doing in there?" Joe wasn't sure if he was awake or simply dreaming that he was awake. He certainly couldn't move. His body felt stiff with cold and every part of him ached. Joe couldn't open his eyes yet, but he knew without a doubt he hadn't woken up between the silk sheets of his four-poster bed. "I said, what are you doing in there?" came the voice again. Joe frowned, puzzled. His butler didn't have an Indian accent. Joe struggled to unglue eyes that had been stuck together with sleep. He saw a big smiley face hovering over his. It was Raj's. "Why are you here at this ungodly hour, Master Spud?" asked the kindly news agent. As dawn was beginning to glow through the gloom, Joe took in his surroundings. He had climbed into a skip outside Rudge's shop and fallen asleep. Some bricks had been his pillow, a piece of tarpaulin his duvet, and a dusty old wooden door his mattress. No wonder every part of his body ached. "Oh, hello, Rudge," croaked Joe. "Hello, Joe. I was just opening up my shop and heard some snoring. There you were. I was quite surprised, I must tell you." "I don't snore," protested Joe. "I regret to inform you that you do. Now, would you be so kind as to climb out of the skip and step inside my shop? I think we need to talk," said Rudge in a deadly serious tone. "Oh no," thought Joe. "Now I am in trouble with Rudge." Although Rudge was adult in age and size, he was nothing like a parent or a teacher, and it was really difficult to get into trouble with him. Once one of the girls from Joe's school had been caught trying to steal a bag of Watsits from the news agent, and Rudge had banned her from his shop for all of 5 minutes. The dusty billionaire clambered out of the skip. Rudge fashioned him a stool from a stack of Heat magazines and wrapped a copy of Financial Times over his shoulders like it was a big, pink, boring blanket. "You must have been outside in the cold all night, Joe. Now you must eat some breakfast. A nice hot mug of lilt, perhaps?" "No, thanks," said Joe. "2 Rolo eggs poached?" Joe shook his head. "You need to eat, boy. A toasted Galaxy bar?" "No, thanks." "A hearty bowl of pickled onion monster munch, perhaps, with warm milk?" "I'm really not hungry, Rudge," said Joe. "Well, my wife has put me on a strict diet, so I'm only allowed to eat fruit for breakfast now," announced Rudge as he opened a Terry's chocolate orange. "Now, are you going to tell me why you slept in a skip last night?" "I ran away from home," announced Joe. "I guessed that much," slurred Rudge, chewing away on multiple segments of Terry's chocolate orange. "Ooh, pips," he said, before spitting something into the palm of his hand. "The question is why?" Joe looked ill at ease. He felt the truth shamed him as much as his dad. "Well, you know that girl I brought in here the day we got ice lollies?" Yes, you know I said I'd seen her somewhere before. Well, she was on TV last night on an advert for pot noodle snacks." "So did you finally kiss her?" exclaimed an excited Rudge. "No, she was only pretending to like me. My dad paid her to be my friend." "Oh dear," said Rudge. His smile fell from his face. "That's not right. That's not right at all." "I hate him," said Joe hotly. "Please don't say that, Joe," said Rudge, shocked. "But I do," said Joe, turning to Rudge with fire in his eyes. "I hate his guts." "Joe, you must stop talking like this right now. He's your father. I hate him and I never want to see him again for as long as I live." Tentatively, Rudge reached out and put his hand on Joe's shoulder. Joe's anger immediately turned to sadness, and with his head bowed, he began to weep into his own lap. His body shook involuntarily as the waves of tears ebbed and flowed through him. "I can understand your pain, Joe, I really can," ventured Rudge. "I know from what you said that you really like that girl. But I guess your dad was, well, just trying to make you happy." "It's all that money," said Joe, barely audible through the tears. "It's ruined everything. I even lost my only friend over it." "Yes, I haven't seen you and Bob together for a while. What happened?" "I behaved like an idiot too. I said some really mean things to him." "Oh dear. We fell out when I paid some bullies to leave him alone. I thought I was helping him, but he got all angry about it." Rudge nodded slowly. "You know, Joe," he said slowly, "it doesn't sound as though what you did to Bob is so very different to what your father did to you." "Maybe I am a spoiled brat," Joe told Rudge, "just like Bob said." "Nonsense," said Rudge. "You did a stupid thing and you must apologize. But if Bob has any sense, he will forgive you. I can see that your heart was in the right place. You meant well." "I just wanted them to stop bullying him," Joe said. "I just thought if I gave them money—" "Well, that's no way to beat bullies, young man." "I know that now," admitted Joe. "If you give them money, they'll just come back and back for more." Yes, but I was only trying to help him." You have to realize money can't solve everything. Maybe Bob would have stood up to the bullies himself eventually. Money is not the answer. You know, I once was a very rich man." "Really?" said Joe, instantly embarrassed that he sounded a little too surprised. He sniffed and wiped his wet face on his sleeve. Oh, yes, replied Raj. I once owned a large chain of newsagents. Wow, how many shops did you have, Raj? 2. I was taking home literally hundreds of dollars a week. If I wanted anything, I'd simply have it. 6 chicken nuggets, I would have 9. I flashed out on a flash brand new second-hand Ford Fiesta, and I would think nothing of returning a DVD to Blockbuster a day late and incurring a fine. So, yeah, that sounds like quite a roller coaster ride, said Joe. Not sure what else to say. What went wrong? 2 shops meant I was working very long hours, young Joe, and I forgot to spend time with the one person I really loved, my wife. I would buy her lavish gifts, boxes of After 8 mints, a gold-plated necklace from the Argos catalogue, designer dresses from George and Astor. I thought that was the way to make her happy, but all she really wanted was to spend time with me, concluded Raj, with a sad smile. That's all I want, exclaimed Joe. To spend time with my dad. I don't care about all the stupid money, said Joe. Come on. I'm sure your father loves you very much. He'll be worried sick. Let me take you home, said Raj. Joe looked at Raj and managed a little smile. Okay, but can we stop off at Bob's on the way? I really need to talk to him. Yes, I think you're right. Now, I believe I have his address somewhere, as his mum gets the mirror delivered, said Raj as he began to flick through his address book. Or is it the Telegraph or the Canal Boat Weekly? I never can remember. Ah, here we are, flat 112, the Winton Estate. That's miles away, said Joe. Don't worry, Joe. We'll take the Rajmobile. This is the Rajmobile, said Joe. He and Raj were looking at a tiny girl's tricycle. It was pink and had a little white basket on the front. It would have been too small for a girl of 6. Yes, said Raj proudly. When Raj had mentioned the Rajmobile, Joe's mind had conjured up images of Batman's Batmobile, or James Bond's Aston Martin, or at least Scooby-Doo's van. It's a little small for you, don't you think? He asked. I bought it on eBay for $3.50, Joe. It looked a lot bigger in the photograph. I think they had a very small man stand next to it in the picture. Still, at that price, quite a bargain. Reluctantly, Joe sat in the front basket as Raj took his place on the saddle. Hold on tight, Joe. The Rajmobile is quite a beast, said Raj, before he started pedaling, and the trike trundled off slowly, squeaking with every turn of the wheels. Tring! That wasn't... Oh, I think I've done that joke too many times now. Hello, said a kindly but sad-looking lady at the door of flat 112. Are you Bob's mum? Asked Joe. Yes, said the woman. She squinted at him. You must be Joe, she said in a not very friendly tone. Bob has told me all about you. Okay, squirmed Joe. I'd like to see him if that's okay. I'm not really sure he'll want to see you. It's really important, said Joe. I know I've treated him badly, but I want to make up for it, please. Bob's mum sighed, then opened the door. Come in then, she said. Joe followed her into the little flat. The whole thing could have fitted into his ensuite bathroom. The building had definitely seen better days. Wallpaper was peeling off the walls and the carpets were worn in places. Bob's mum led Joe along the corridor to Bob's room and knocked on his door. What? Came Bob's voice. Joe's here to see you, replied Bob's mum. Tell him to get lost. Bob's mum looked at Joe embarrassed. Don't be rude, Bob. Open the door. I don't want to talk to him. Maybe I should go, whispered Joe, half turning towards the front door. Bob's mum shook her head. Open this door at once, Bob. You hear me? At once. Slowly the door opened. Bob was still in his pajamas and stood staring at Joe. What do you want? He demanded. To talk to you. Go on then, talk. Shall I make you two some breakfast? Asked Bob's mum. No, he's not staying. Bob's mum tutted and disappeared into the kitchen. I just came to say I'm sorry, spluttered Joe. It's a bit late for that, isn't it? Look, I am so sorry for all the things I said. You were really nasty. I know, I'm sorry. I just couldn't work out why you were so upset with me. I only gave the grubs money because I wanted to make things easier for you. Yes, but... I know. I realize now it was the wrong thing to do. I'm just explaining how I felt at the time. A true friend would have stuck up for me, supported me, instead of just flashing their money around to make the problem go away. I am an idiot, Bob. I know that now. A great big fat stinking idiot. Bob smiled a little, though he was clearly trying hard not to. And you were right about Lauren, of course, about her being fake. Yes, I found out my dad was paying her to be my friend, said Joe. I didn't know that. That must have really hurt. Joe's heart ached as he remembered how much pain he had felt at the party last night. It did. I really liked her. I know. You forgot who your real friends were. Joe felt so guilty. I know. I'm so sorry. I do really like you, Bob. I really do. You're the only kid at school who ever liked me for me, not just my money. Let's not fall out again. Hey, Joe? Bob smiled. Joe smiled too. All I ever really wanted was a friend. You're still my friend, Joe. You always will be. Listen, Joe said. I've got something for you. A present. To say sorry. Joe, said Bob, frustrated. Look, if it's a new Rolex or a load of money, I don't want it, all right? Joe smiled. No, it's just a Twix. I thought we could share it. Joe pulled out the chocolate bar and Bob chuckled. Joe chuckled too. He opened the packet and handed Bob one of the fingers. But just as Joe was about to scoff the chocolate and caramel-topped biscuit, Joe, called Bob's mum from the kitchen. You better come quickly. Your dad's on the TV. Broken. That's the only word that could describe how Joe's dad looked. He was standing outside Bumfresh Towers in his dressing gown. Mr. Spud addressed the camera, his eyes red from crying. I've lost everything, he said slowly, his whole face shattered with emotion. Everything. But all I want is my son back, my beautiful boy. Then the tears welled up in Mr. Spud and he had to catch his breath. Joe looked over at Bob and his mum. They stood in the kitchen staring at the screen. What does he mean he's lost everything? It was just on the news, she replied. Everyone is suing your dad. Bumfresh has made everyone's bottoms go purple. What? Replied Joe. He turned back to the TV. If you are watching out there, son, come home, please. I beg you. I need you. I miss you so much. Joe reached out and touched the screen. He could feel tears welling in the corners of his eyes. A hiss of static danced on his fingertips. You'd better go to him, said Bob. Yeah, said Joe, too shocked to move. If your dad and you need anywhere to stay, you're both welcome here, said Bob's mum. Yeah, of course, chimed in Bob. Thanks so much, I'll tell him, said Joe. Look, I gotta go. Yeah, said Bob. He opened his arms and gave Joe a hug. Joe couldn't remember the last time anyone had hugged him. It was one thing money couldn't buy. Bob was a brilliant hugger too. He was all squidgy. I'll see you later, I suppose, said Joe. I'll make shepherd's pie, said Bob's mom with a smile. My dad loves shepherd's pie, replied Joe. I remember, said Bob's mum. Me and your dad were at school together. Really? Asked Joe. Yes, he had a bit more hair and a bit less money back then, she joked. Joe allowed himself a little laugh. Thank you so much. The lift was out of order, so Joe raced down the stairs, bouncing off the walls as he did so. He ran out into the car park where Rudge was waiting. Bumfresh Towers, Rudge, and step on it. Rudge pedalled hard and the trike trundled off down the street. They passed a rival newsagent's shop and Joe clocked the headlines on the papers in racks outside. Dad was on the front of every page. Well, nearly every front page. You were right, Rudge, said Joe as they sped up the high street. About what in particular, replied the newsagent as he mopped the sweat from his brow. About Bumfresh. It has made everyone's bottom go purple. I told you so. Did you look yours? So much had happened since Joe's had left Rudge's shop yesterday afternoon. He'd completely forgotten. No. Rudge swerved the Rudgemobile onto the verge. Joe leaped off and looked down at the back of his trousers. It's purple. Joe pulled his trousers up and jumped back onto Rudgemobile. Let's go. As they approached Bumfresh Towers, Joe saw that there were hundreds of journalists and camera crews waiting outside the gates of his house. As they approached, all the cameras turned to them, and hundreds of flashes went off. They were blocking their entrance, and Rudge had no choice but to stop the trike. You on live on Sky News. How do you feel now that your father faces financial ruin? Joe was too shocked to reply, but still men in raincoats continued to shout questions at him. BBC News, is there going to be compensation packages for the millions of people around the world whose bottoms have gone purple? CNN, do you think your father will face criminal charges? Rudge cleared his throat. If I may make a short statement, gentlemen. All the cameras turned to the newsagent, and there was a hushed silence for a moment. At Rudge's shop in Bolsover Street, I'm doing a very special offer on Frazzles. Buy 10 packets, get one free, for a limited time only. The journalists all sighed loudly and muttered their annoyance. Ding, ding! Rudge rang the bell on his trike, and the sea of reporters parted to let him and Joe through. Thank you so much, chirped Rudge with a smile, and I have some out-of-date lion bars at half price, only slightly mouldy. As Rudge pedalled hard up along the driveway, Joe was shocked to see that there was already a fleet of lorries parked up by the front door. An army of bulky men in leather jackets were carrying out all of his dad's paintings and chandeliers and diamond-encrusted golf clubs. Rudge stopped the bike and leaped out of the basket and ran down the huge stone steps. Sapphire was hurrying out in a pair of impossibly high heels laden with a huge suitcase and numerous handbags. Out of my way, she hissed. Where's my dad? I don't know, I don't care. The idiot lost all his money. As she ran down the steps, the heel of her shoe broke off and she took a tumble. The case crashed on the stone floor and broke open. A blizzard of banknotes swirled into the air. Sapphire began screaming and crying as mascara ran down her cheeks. She leaped up, trying desperately to catch them. Joe looked back at her with a mixture of anger and pity. He then raced into the house. It was now completely bare of any belongings. Joe fought past the bailiffs and sprinted up the grand spiral staircase. He passed a couple of burly men making off with hundreds of miles of Scalextric's track. For a millisecond, Joe felt a pang of regret, but he carried on running and burst through the door to his dad's bedroom. The room was white and bare, almost serene in its emptiness. Hunched on a bare mattress with his back to the door was his dad, wearing only a vest and a pair of boxer shorts, his fat, hairy arms and legs contrasting with his bald head. They had even taken his toupee. "Dad!" shouted Joe. "Joe! My boy, you came home!" "I'm sorry I ran away, Dad. I'm so upset I hurt you with all the business with Lauren. I just wanted to make you happy. I know, I forgive you, Dad. I've lost everything, everything. Even Sapphire's gone." "I'm not sure she was the one, Dad." "No?" "No," replied Joe, as he tried not to shake his head too hard. "No, maybe not," said Dad. "Now we've got no house, no money, no private jet. What are we going to do, son?" Joe reached into his trouser pocket and pulled out a check. "Dad?" "Yes, my boy." "The other day I was going through my pockets and I found this." Dad studied it. It was the one he had written his son for his birthday for $2 million. "I never paid it in," said Joe excitedly. "You can have it back. Then you can buy us somewhere to live and still have loads of money left over." Joe looked at his son. Joe wasn't sure if his father was happy or sad. "Thank you so much, my boy. You are a great lad. You really are. But I'm sorry to say this check is worthless." "Worthless?" Joe was shocked. "Why?" "Because I have no money left in my bank account. There are so many lawsuits against me. The banks have frozen all my accounts. I'm bankrupt now. If you had paid it in when I gave it to you, we would still have $2 million. Joe felt a little frightened that somehow he had done something wrong. "Are you angry with me, Dad?" Dad looked at Joe and smiled. "No, I'm pleased you didn't cash it in. All that money never really made us happy, did it?" "No," said Joe. "In fact, it made us sad. And I'm sorry too. You brought my homework to school and I shouted at you for embarrassing me. Bob was right. I have behaved like a spoiled brat at times." Dad chuckled. "Just a little." Joe jumped along closer to his dad. He needed a hug. At that moment, 2 burly bailiffs entered the room. "We've got to take the mattress," announced one. The Spuds offered no resistance and stood up to let the man carry the last item out of the room. "If there's anything you want to grab from your room, boy, I'd do it now." "I don't need anything, Dad," replied Joe. "There must be something. Designer shades, a gold watch, your iPod." They watched as the 2 men carried the mattress out of Mr. Spud's bedroom. It was now completely bare. Joe thought for a moment. "There is something," he said. He disappeared out of the room. Mr. Spud moved over to the window. He watched helplessly as the leather-jacketed men carried out everything he owned. Silver cutlery, crystal vases, antique furniture, everything, and loaded it into trucks. In a few moments, Joe reappeared. "Did you manage to grab anything?" asked Dad eagerly. "Just one thing." Joe opened his hand and showed his dad the sad little Lou Rolls rocket. "But why?" said Dad. He couldn't believe his son had kept the old thing, let alone chosen it as the one thing he wanted to say from the house. "It's the best thing you ever gave me," said Joe. Dad's eyes clouded over with tears. "But it's just a loo roll with another loo roll stuck into it," he spluttered. "I know," said Joe, "but it was made with love. It means more to me than all the expensive stuff you bought me." Dad shook with uncontrollable emotion and wrapped his short, hairy arms around his son. He rested his head on his dad's chest. He felt that it was wet with tears. "I love you, Dad." "Ditto. I love you too, son." "Dad," said Joe tentatively. "Yes?" "Do you fancy shepherd's pie for tea?" "More than anything in the world," said Dad. Father and son held each other tight. Finally, Joe had everything he could ever need. The end.